are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is the parking lot murder of Savannah Gold. Now, this was a girl with a heart of gold and a last name to match, but it was also a disappearance that began with a strange text and would end with surveillance footage. However, this case isn't fully solved today, and we still have no idea what happened in this parking lot and why. By the way, I post so much content like this. It is my passion to tell these stories, and I mean absolutely no harm or disrespect when I do so. And if it's something that you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed, give this video a thumbs up, and leave a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2017 in Florida, and the Gold family lived in Jacksonville. The parents were Dan and Sherry, and they had a 21-year-old daughter named Savannah Page. She had been born on April 26th of 1996, but she was currently out of school. She'd already graduated high school, and she had been working at the Bonefish Grill for about 2 years. She really thrived in this environment, and it was just a good place for her. It was located on San Jose Boulevard in Mandarin, which was about 30 minutes away from her home, but she absolutely loved it there, so it really was working. And Savannah was the type of girl with interests of all kinds, and this made it really easy for her to obtain friends and keep them because she was interested in different things, and she also didn't judge anybody else for what they were interested in and was accepting of all different kinds of people. Her friends were people of different backgrounds, people with different interests. Some were extremely athletic and sporty, and others were artistic and creative. And although, people can be both, there were some people that were on the drastic different sides of the spectrum, and Savannah loved all of them. It was really more important to her what was inside a person's heart than how much money they had or what kind of family they came from or what jobs they had, and she really did care about people's souls and the inside of someone and their heart, and so she loved basically anyone that was kind. Her friends never had a bad thing to say about her, and neither did her customers at the Bonefish Grill where she worked. She was a server, and customers would say that Savannah would greet them every time they walked in the door, and it wasn't just like that fake customer service happiness or kindness that some people can exude. It was more that she was just genuinely happy to see them, and it wasn't just the people that were her regulars that would come in. It would be people who would come in for the first time, and Savannah would just show them such kindness that they would want to go back and go back to her. She wanted everybody around her to feel as though they were welcomed in the world, no matter if that was out and about, or that was where they were working, or that was where they ate dinner. She just wanted people to know that they had a place in the world, and it's so beautiful to hear that this is how Savannah was. And when she wasn't working, she actually loved nature. It's something that brought her a lot of peace, and she would go to the local parks and she would climb trees, she would ride bikes around the little paths, and she just really loved getting that sense of peace and grounding herself within the trees and the leaves and the plants, and it was a way she could get away from the rest of the world and relax. Now, I told you a bit about how Savannah had gone straight into working after high school, and this wasn't always her plan. You see, she was wonderful at sewing, at dancing, at lots of different things. She just seemed like she had a wide variety of interests, and she was pretty good at them all. She also loved playing lacrosse, and she would actually get a scholarship to the Savannah College of Art and Design, and this would have paid for a ton or possibly all of her schooling, and she was really excited about this. However, she would turn it down. This wasn't because she was scared to go or she didn't think she would enjoy it. It was actually because her mother had been diagnosed with cancer, and she decided she was going to stay there and help take care of her. And this really shows how selfless that Savannah was. She didn't feel that she was being let down or that she was not getting to do what she wanted in life. It was just how her life was going, and she wanted to be her mother's caregiver, and she was determined to do so. She had a bright future ahead. She had planned for it, but she gave that all up to make sure her family was okay. This just means that she was a natural born caregiver, and I think that a lot of caregivers aren't praised enough for what they do and what they sacrifice without even saying that it's a sacrifice, because they still believe they're doing it for the good of everybody, including themselves, and they don't see it as a sacrifice for what they could have done. And she didn't need the scholarship anyway. She was the type that was so talented that could have gotten anything she put her mind to. With a soul like hers, she could have changed the world if she would have gotten the opportunity to. You see, it was now August 2nd, 2017. It was a normal Wednesday. Savannah would leave her home and drive the 30 minutes wearing her work uniform to go into the Bonefish Grill for her shift. And she was always on time. She never called in sick or just didn't show up. And she would never turn up. And her coworkers knew this was strange, but didn't want to cause such a panic without knowing exactly what was going on. There could have been a family emergency, so they didn't really say anything. However, that is when her family would actually get a text message from her phone. Her father and her brother would get a message saying that she had basically run away with this nice guy she had just met, and basically that she wasn't coming back and that she would be in contact later on. And immediately they knew that this was strange. But when her mother, who had stage 4 cancer at this time, got a hold of the phones and looked at this message, she said, "This is not Savannah." It wasn't how she spoke. It wasn't in the tone that she used. It didn't even have the same grammar that she would have used. And her mother, Sherry, said, "That's not Savannah. Somebody else sent that message." Now, when they texted Savannah back and just asked her, what was going on, they got no response. And this is when Sherry and Dan, her parents, would call into the police department and report Savannah missing. And investigators would go to the very restaurant that she was supposed to work at that day and actually find her vehicle there. It was a white 4-door 2007 Kia. And the thing was, the doors were unlocked and her purse was still inside. Now, there seemed to be no sign of a struggle. However, her front driver's side tire had been punctured and it was now flat. Now, the thing was, if her car was unlocked with the purse still inside, her money still inside, this obviously wasn't a horrible area where people would, break in or steal the money, or were just like roaming to break into different cars, because they would have seen this and they would have taken it. So if it wasn't a horrible area, what had happened to Savannah between her being in her car and her getting to the front door of her restaurant? Because she was in the parking lot. Well, investigators would quickly, or as quickly as they could, receive the surveillance footage that was from kind of different locations around this parking lot. They weren't the best surveillance footage, but they could see that Savannah had gotten out of her car that day. She was wearing her work uniform, but she hadn't gone into the building. She had actually gone into the car parked next to hers. It was parked facing the opposite direction, and it was a 4-door silver Chevy Malibu with Florida tags. And she had gotten into the back seat of this car, and a little while later, it would drive away with her still inside. She had not been seen since she'd gotten into this car, and she had not arrived back in that parking lot. Of course, the next course of action would be to find the driver of this vehicle. However, if it was a stolen vehicle, they couldn't be sure that this owner would know anything about Savannah's disappearance, but they wanted to try. So they were tracking the owner, and they were also talking to her coworkers inside the Bonefish Grill and saying, have you talked to Savannah? Did you talk to her that day? Did you see her at all that day? Were you in the parking lot when all this happened? And nobody had known anything. However, they did know that that Savannah's vehicle had been previously vandalized pretty close to when this disappearance occurred. The person that had vandalized Savannah's vehicle had never been caught. However, they had just gotten back the reports of who this car belonged to that was in the parking lot that day. They traced the license plate back to a 28-year-old man named Lee Rodarte. And 2 days after Savannah's disappearance, he would be questioned at his home. This was kind of late at night. They would show up. They would say, "Can we ask you a few questions?" And he was okay with this, and they would come in, and he would basically say that he didn't know where she was, that it had been a while since they had hung out, but that he was very concerned about her. You see, Lee and Savannah did know each other. There was a connection, because Lee had worked at that very Bonefish Grill as the chef and the manager for the last 5 years. So, Savannah was his employee. Co-workers at the Bonefish Grill said Lee seemed deeply concerned that Savannah hadn't showed up to her shift, and he was putting out missing persons posters. Savannah's parents said, "Look, he had come up to us when we were searching and asking questions, and he was expressing his concern to us as well and really worried about Savannah and where she was." And at this point, of course, it was great that there was a connection as to why Lee's car was in the parking lot. He worked there. Obviously, his car would be there. But the only question now was, why did Savannah get in his car? Why did he drive away with her? And why hadn't anybody seen her? That is when Lee began to say he was never in the parking lot, and he began to go on and on about how Savannah had a serious drug problem. Now, there was actual footage of the interrogation of when Lee was brought in the next day on August 5th to be interrogated for, well, we know that the footage is about an hour. However, there are multiple scenes that have been cut. Now, not only is this interrogation footage important to kind of see the psychology behind Lee, what he was thinking, what he was saying, but the techniques used on him to obtain more information are unlike anything I have ever seen in interrogation footage, and I kind of want to analyze it with you guys and see kind of why it would work. I will be playing a little bit of it for you, but I will also walk you through it as we analyze it together. Now, first off, I should fill you in that the investigators had noticed on Lee's body that he had some scrapes or some cuts, and they were a little bloody, and this was on his neck as well as his arm. And they had asked him about this, and he had kind of looked at him and he said, well, they were actually self-inflicted, that he was having a hard time and that he did it himself. And when they asked him when, he said in July, which would have been, the previous month. And they said, then why do they look so fresh and they're bloody? And he would say that he often picked off the scabs when he was at work, and they would become bloody again and never really heal. Now, they kind of moved past that, and Lee would admit that he worked with Savannah, but also that they were a little bit more than that. Lee said he did have a girlfriend named Chelsea a while back, but he and Savannah had started talking and hanging out about 8 months ago. They had had an instant connection. They had started talking on Facebook because they knew each other from work, and then they started hanging out outside of work. And he said that they just really got each other because they had both been from troubled backgrounds. He had said that made him a lot closer, and he admitted having a sexual relationship with her. The only reason this stopped was because his girlfriend Chelsea would find out that he was having an affair. That's when he would drop a bombshell. He would say the real reason that he backed away so far from Savannah was because she was using drugs heavily at this point. He said that they would often do drugs together, and she used the harder ones and he kind of used the, lesser harsh ones, and that when she began to get really into the hard drugs, he was kind of triggered by the fact that his parents used to do drugs while he was growing up, and his mother was addicted to meth, and that he didn't want to be around her if she was doing that, and he had told her that. So they kind of stopped hanging out, and he would get back with his, now ex, Chelsea, because when she found out about the affair, they broke it off, but he would then get back with her. Lee said that by that June of 2017, so about 2 months prior to her disappearance, Savannah had been at work again. She was at work this whole time, but Lee said this was the first time he had seen her at work and that she was looking really good. He said she had begun to get really petite, but now she seemed to be gaining weight. She appeared to be off the drugs, and they started to talk at work, and he had found out that Savannah had stopped doing any kind of drugs because she had landed in the hospital, where she then went through with a detox. And after missing a couple of days, she was then back at work. After hearing all this, Lee said that they began to hang out again and that everything was going well and they were really getting along, until a few weeks later, Savannah would come over with drugs again. And Lee told her that she shouldn't go back down this path, but she would not listen. And that is when he said he broke it off again, saying they were going far too fast into the relationship and that she still needed to get help, so they weren't going to hang out anymore. Lee would say that when Savannah took the heroin in front of him, he would basically find an excuse to get out of that scenario where they were together, and then he would text her saying they needed some time apart, that he was dealing with personal issues, depression, and that he needed to deal with those on his own. And Savannah was okay with this. She said she wouldn't text him again, and this would be in July, and this would be just a few weeks prior to her disappearance. And this is when Lee said that was the last time he had spoken to her. Now, we are still in the interrogation room where Lee was being questioned at this point, and Lee would seemingly out of nowhere say that he had lied to investigators. And when they asked him to elaborate, he would say that that was not the last time he had seen her. It was in fact in the parking lot on Wednesday where she had disappeared. And that is when he would go into why he was there. He would say that he was actually at Bonefish Grill to confront Savannah because she had been telling all of their coworkers that they were sleeping together, that they were in a relationship, and this was not allowed considering he was manager and she was his employee, and he was afraid that he was going to get fired for this because they weren't even together at this point. And so he was going to confront her and tell her to stop because he did not want to lose his job over something that wasn't even true. So at 5:30 that day, Lee would drive to the Bonefish Grill because he knew that Savannah had a shift. He would pull in after her and he would then ask her as she got out of the car to come talk to him, and she would say that she would, and then she would ask to get in the backseat of his car because she had just taken heroin and she was feeling paranoid. And so she got in the back seat and he would begin to, ask her to stop telling all of these rumors to the employees so neither of them would get in trouble. Lee would ask her why she didn't just get in the front seat, and she said she didn't want anyone to see her, but he could get in the back seat with her. So that's when he would get out and get in the back seat with Savannah, and he would be telling her she needed to stop saying all this, that is why they were talking, and to get her to focus. And he would say Savannah would basically not want to listen and would continue to say she wasn't going to do what he was telling her to do, and she was going to say whatever she wanted to say. This is when Lee would bring up the fact that his now girlfriend, once again, Chelsea, was kind of feeling paranoid about them being back together again. Chelsea was apparently being told by Savannah's friend Rachel that Savannah and Lee were cheating on her again, and that they were together, they were hanging out all the time, and allegedly Savannah had told Rachel this. And so Lee was saying, why would you tell Rachel this? Because you know it's a lie. And she basically said because she wanted to. So Chelsea was beginning to think that Lee was cheating on her again, was badgering him about it, and that is ultimately why Lee said he went to talk to Savannah, because he was sick of Chelsea kind of just being on him about the fact that he was cheating, even though he knew he was no longer cheating, even though he had in the past. He said Savannah admitted to spreading the rumors, and he told her again she needed to stop. And that is when the interrogation footage would be cut. And this is the first time that I really saw a cut in it. And whatever Lee said happened next had been taken out of the footage. But it would come back with him saying that he did it because he was upset. And then he said, Savannah said, F you, you piece of... Then she would say she would continue to say whatever she wanted. And anytime they would talk about what Lee did before Savannah said that, it was cut out. So whatever was said by him that he did has not been released to the public. And it's only speculation of what he said and then what he did during this time. Lee said that is when Savannah would get out of his vehicle and she would be texting or calling someone, and she would be walking down the road towards the highway, and he would get out of the back seat and get into the front seat and prepare to drive away. However, like 5 minutes later, he would then see an old green Ford pickup truck, and it had tinted windows, and it would drive up, and Savannah would get into the front seat, the passenger seat, and he had seen a baseball cap, but that's all he saw of the person driving. And they would drive away together, and then Lee would kind of drive in the same direction because that was the direction towards his house, and it would take him about 25 minutes to get home. And that's where he said he went, and he had a roommate named Aaron. However, Aaron had not yet been home. He would get home later that night, so it couldn't be confirmed by him that Lee would go home right then and that he was alone. And this seems like a good story. There's not necessarily anyone to corroborate this alibi, but it did make sense. However, this is not what they saw in their surveillance footage. And that footage would be crucial in this investigation. You see, Lee would be asked why he didn't come forward with all of this information about the green Ford pickup truck that is huge. You know, if she was last seen in this truck, that would be a huge, huge statement to come forward with. And he would say he didn't know why, but he regretted not saying anything, and that he had a warrant out for his arrest for a court date for a ticket that he didn't go to. So he was worried that he would be in trouble for that if he called in for something else. This is when Lee would be caught in a lie, because he would say he had called Chelsea, his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, who knows what they were at this time, and this was after he was talked to by the police for the first time at his home. So it was like late at night. They had come and talked to him before bringing him in the next day. He said he told Chelsea that he had talked to police and he didn't know what else to do from there. And the investigators, these were the ones that had talked to him at his house, and they said, we left your house at like 11 p.m. Did you really call Chelsea after that and talk to her about everything? And he said, oh, no, actually, I called her prior to that because I had heard about it on the news. And of course, I had, been seeing her that day that she disappeared, so I had already called Chelsea, filled her in on everything, and talked to her about it before you even got there. And his stories just began to mesh together, and it was harder for him to answer questions the more he was pressed about the stories he was telling. And this was the first red flag. Well, not the first red flag, but one of the red flags in his investigation, in his interrogation. He would say that Chelsea had told him to call the hotline about her disappearance and tell them what he knew. And when they asked him if he did this, he said no. And, he couldn't really say why he didn't do it. He would then say he sent Chelsea a picture of an object that we don't really get to know what it was, but he deleted that picture because it was found that this was one of the items that could be connected in this disappearance, and it's not really known. This item was allegedly shown on the news that could have a connection to Savannah's disappearance, but then he would take a picture of it and send it to Chelsea, and investigators would catch him saying that he took a picture of this. But once again, this is information that we do not know. He said he had went home that night alone. He had eaten dinner alone, and he had gone to bed. However, investigators had found that he had actually ordered Papa John's for 2. And when he was asked about this, he said, oh, actually, yeah, I had Chelsea over and we both ate it. And they said, so you didn't have dinner alone. Why would you lie about that? And he said, no, I had corn dogs alone before that, and then Chelsea came over, and then we had Papa John's. And Once again, his stories were just seeming very odd at this point. And he also said at this point Chelsea didn't want anything to do with him anymore because he had gone to see Savannah that day at the Bonefish Grill, even though he told her that it was to get her to stop spreading the rumors. After listening to Lee talk about his version of events, they were pretty convinced he was not telling the truth. He had then told two different stories. He had told one story at his house, one story at the police station, and both of them had holes in it that just weren't adding up. And they said that they talked to Chelsea, and Chelsea did not believe Lee's version of events and said that he was a really good liar and that he often lied. Now, I had told you his story didn't match up with the surveillance footage, and what was found on that surveillance footage would be quite telling, because Savannah had gotten into his vehicle that day. However, it hadn't just been that they had gotten in and drove away and nothing else had been seen. They had actually seen on the footage that the door where she had gotten into his vehicle, the back door, it would be opened several times, but no one would get out. It was as though someone was kicking it or hitting it open, and it would close every time without anybody escaping. There were lots of surveillance footage because there were multiple cameras where this grill was located, because it was in a shopping center, and they would see Lee's car shaking like there was something happening inside, possibly a struggle. And that is when Lee would get out of the back seat. He would go over to Savannah's car. He would take an object out of it, put it in his car. Then he would go back to Savannah's car and puncture the tire before getting in and driving away. Savannah had never left his vehicle. That is when they would really get into it in the interrogation room and begin to say, "Where is Savannah? You need to tell us where Savannah is." And they would be pressuring him over and over and over. And again, he would be saying, I don't know. But this time he was getting a lot more riled up, and he was getting angry every time they asked him. He was saying, I don't know. And that is when something very interesting to me happened, because I had never seen this before. It may be something common or a technique that I personally am not educated about, and if you do know, please let me know down below. But there was a male and a female officer with him, and the female officer began to cry as she was talking about Savannah and saying that she had a daughter Savannah's age and that she just couldn't imagine her daughter being in this scenario, and that Lee needed to tell her where she was and was pleading and begging him to do so. The female officer was saying that Savannah had never gotten out of the car, saying that he had done something, he knew where she was, and he needed to tell them. And she was doing this all while sobbing and begging him to give them an answer so the search could end. And at the same time, the male officer was sitting in there, and he was saying, we don't think that it's your fault. We don't think you did anything, but Savannah was in your car, so we're just trying to put together the pieces. And he was coming up with these crazy theories, thinking, or saying Savannah was maybe on drugs. Something happened, an overdose, or someone else did something. It's not your fault, but you do know something, and we need to know whatever you know. Lee was at this point looking back and forth between the two of them, refusing to say anything, and the female officer began to say the green truck never existed. We never saw it on any of the footage, and that the officers were just fact finders, that all they were trying to do is figure out what happened, and that they weren't liars. They couldn't fabricate tapes showing them what had happened. And she was really pushing in on him and saying they already knew the answer. They knew that he was lying. And once again, she was doing all of this while pleading with him and crying. And we'll get into why I think that was in a little bit. It would really ramp up when Lee would begin to shrug his shoulders instead of saying, I don't know, like he didn't care. And that's when the female officer really began to ramp up the emotions even more, saying, be a human. You're a human. You're not this cruel inside. I know you're not evil. I'm begging you. And was really leaning in and grasping at any emotion she could get out of Lee. And she was saying that she believed that he would tell them where she was because she believed he did have a conscience. And that's when he would go quiet for a very long time. After this, he began answering the questions, still saying no, but it had much more emotion in his tone. You know, instead of just saying, I don't know, like he didn't care, he was saying, no, I didn't hurt her. I don't know where she is. And it was really just seeming very emotional, or much more emotional than he had been. Or they would ask him where he had taken her, if it was back to his house, and he had said no, but then they said, where did you drop her off? And he said, I didn't drop her off. When he said that he didn't drop her off, they knew that they had him, because he just admitted that he had her in his car and that he didn't leave her somewhere right then. That's when they asked him where the two of them went that day, and he would finally talk. He would say that he had taken her back to his house to do some drugs, and they hung out for a while before Savannah called an Uber and left, and that he was too high to realize where she was going or what she was doing or ask her any questions. When they finally had him talking, they would ask what happened in the parking lot and why the door seemed to open 3 times, the car was shaking, and Savannah never got out after that. And this is when the footage would cut. So we don't know what he said, but the officers then would be telling Lee if this had happened, Savannah wouldn't have gone with him willingly after that. And when they kind of confronted him with the fact that he possibly was lying about this, he shut down once again. And he asked what he was being charged with. He wanted to know why he was still there, and he was really pushing back against the officers. So they needed to get him back on track at this point.
Is she?
I don't know where she is.
Where is Savannah?
I don't know.
I need to know where Savannah is. So
I don't
let
know
her family
where
know.
she is.
You don't know because you had something done with her and you weren't involved in that part? I don't know. Tell me something. What can I work with?
I told you the last time I saw her.
But that's not true because we have proof. We have proof. And that's why we're sitting here, Lee. At this point, we need this for her. I mean, I look at that little girl and I think of my little girl. My little girl who's her age. That's who I think about. That was my little girl. I couldn't imagine. I don't care what she said about you or whatever, but my little girl is that age.
Maybe.
And you're not telling the truth.
Maybe something gets out of hand in the car.
I didn't do anything.
Okay, you didn't do anything, but she was in your car. She never got out of your car. She never got out of your car, Lee.
We're not saying that you did anything. I'm trying to find her. I didn't say you
I
did
don't know
anything.
where she is.
Well, we can prove that you left with her in the car. So please, do everybody a favor and just tell us.
Where is she?
I don't know.
You got to be able to separate. We're not sitting here saying you did anything to her. I don't know. She's on drugs. Maybe she passed out. I don't know. I'm not in that car with you guys. I know that she's in that car with you. I have proof of all of this.
Okay, let me ask you, Lee. Then tell us now if you're being an honest man. Are you being honest?
Yes.
Okay, well, then let's start being honest. She never got out of your back seat, Lee. She never got out of your back seat. Video cameras don't lie.
Lee.
How do you know? How do you think I know this information, Lee? I wasn't there, but a video camera caught it.
Tell me what happened.
I don't know.
What happened to her? Was it an overdose? Is that what happened? I don't know. I'm not in the car with you guys. You just said she was in your car and she had admittedly had done heroin. Bodies overdose all the time. Is that what happens? Does she overdose?
Okay, well, tell us when you left with her in the car, because that is what is shown. We can't make up that. We can't falsify a video camera, Lee. I'm not lying to you, because you know I'm telling the truth, because you know that's what's on the video. How else would I know that? I don't, unless I have the video. Where did you go with her?
I didn't go anywhere with her.
You did.
No.
You did. So the video camera's lying?
I don't know this. I mean...
Well, I'm telling you. I'm not lying to you. I'm not making that up. That's why I'm so passionate about this. This is someone's child. You might not have kids, but damn it, she's someone's kid. It's not fair to her mom with stage 4 cancer. All she wants to know is where her daughter is. But I have this man sitting over here, a 28-year-old man, that first says, you haven't seen her. You didn't see her that day. To now the roles have reversed a little bit because we've been doing our background. Okay? And now you're saying that she was sitting in your car, which all lines up with the video, actually. I'm glad that you said you got in the back seat with her. All that lines up. But you know what doesn't line up? After that passenger door comes open and shuts, comes open and shuts, she never gets out of that car. And you drive off. She never gets out of that car. There is no green truck. And that's not right to her. We're fact finders, Lee. I don't have anything personal against you.
No, not at all. I mean, it's
we're just fact finders. We're just doing our job. No. Where did you go with her? Where did you go with her, Lee? Be human. You're a human. You're a man. Where did you go with her? I know you're not that cruel inside. Seriously. Where did you go with her?
Maybe you don't know where she is now. Where did you go with her?
Please. I'm begging you, Lee. Please. Please tell us. Please don't make us waste any more of our time. Just tell us. Please tell us. Please. I'm begging you. I know you're not evil. Just tell us where she is. I'm begging you. Please. Please. Can you please just tell me? You do know. Is that how you wanted people to think? I know you're not an evil person. I don't see that in you. I don't see that in your history. I don't hear those things about you at work. Please tell us where you went with her. She never got out of your car. Please tell us, Lee, please. I'm begging you. For her family. Please. Please. She didn't get out of your car. And you know that, obviously. Please. Please, Lee. I'm begging you. It's a human.
I don't know.
You too,
Look,
man. Please, Lee. Just please don't make us do this any longer.
Yeah, for her family.
Can you
just tell us where.
Can you just tell us?
Where did you go?
Where did you go with her then? Can you
at least tell us that?
At least tell us that part. Where did you go with her afterwards? She didn't get out of your car, and you know that obviously because I know
we
that.
do. That's why we're here. Just tell us where. Where did you go with her? Tell us that. At least point us in that direction. I owe her family. We're not saying anything that you intentionally did anything. Just tell us where you went. Please.
Lee, it's not.
You're doing
right.
great. I mean, you already told us everything we already know.
It's not right, Lee. This isn't right for her family or for anybody. No one should have to go through this. I'm just human like you are. She's human. Her family. Everybody has feelings. Please. Now's the time to tell us. Because I don't think you're any kind of evil person. And I feel like you are going to tell us the truth. I do believe that. I do believe you're going to tell us the truth because I believe that you do have a conscience. Now's the time. Please.
That's all we're asking. Just where'd you guys go? I think you're a good man. I think you want to do the right thing.
When y'all left out of there, you went down Clare Lane, you made a left on San Jose, got to 295, and you get up on 295. Okay. Where else did you go before you went home? I mean, I know you eventually went home, but...
I didn't go anywhere. I went straight home.
Okay, so what did y'all do when you got home? Savannah was with you. She was with you. And that's okay at that point, but I need to know where did she go from there? Is she still at your house?
No.
Okay. Is she still in your car?
No.
Okay. Well, then, where is she?
I don't know where she is.
Okay, then where did you last drop her off at?
I didn't drop her off.
Okay, well, tell me.
What happened? Where'd you guys go?
We went to my house. We did some drugs.
Okay.
Hung out for a little. And then she said that she was going to catch an Uber home.
Okay. And did she call an Uber?
She pulled her phone out. Looked like she was using it. I wasn't hovering over her. I was pretty high. I mean, I wasn't. She told me she was leaving. She walked out the door.
What was going on in the
Didn't
back
do
seat?
anything to-
What was going on in the back seat? For the doors to be kicked open. She kicked open that door 3 times, Lee. She kicked it. We saw it. And you know I'm not making it up because I wouldn't know this because I wasn't there. I would never know this unless we had video of it, correct? Yes, correct. I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just a fact finder.
I'm not gonna lie to you.
That door kicked over 3 times. Obviously something went on in that back seat. Tell me about that. What happened in the back seat? Did she get mad at you?
I mean, we've gotten arguments plenty of times where she says she doesn't care what happens or anything like that.
But let's be honest. No one's going to go with some man willingly after all that. No one's going to do it. Please tell me where Savannah is. You do know. You do know, Lee. And right now is the time. You're so close, and I know you're going to tell me. I know you are because I just know you are. Because I know you want to do the right thing, but you're scared to do the right thing. I get it.
Yeah.
I do. I'm not.
Can you just tell me what I'd be in charge of, please?
Yes.
The officers then said they didn't believe he was evil, but that something had happened and he needed to tell them what. This is when the footage would cut once again. And this was allegedly when Lee Rodarte would confess to the murder of Savannah Gold. Right before this, he had begun to talk, stopped himself, and would go silent for a little bit once again, like he was weighing his options and seeing if he really had to confess to what he had done. When the footage would come back on, Lee would be seen crying. He would be now alone in this room. He would be banging his head against the walls, and he would be crying and sobbing and kind of scratching at his head and his hair, and he would say things that he was mumbling under his breath, like, "You're so stupid," and "My mom is gonna die while I'm in jail," and "Idiot Lee," and kind of just talking about himself to himself. And he was pacing the room. He was mumbling about Chelsea, saying F Chelsea and what she thinks. He would also say, "I'm so sorry, Savannah." And he would also say, "This is not supposed to be you, Lee. You're supposed to make something of your life." Now, what I really found interesting about this interrogation is the techniques that the officers used is not, like I said, was something I had seen before. And it was a good cop, bad cop, but it wasn't in the way that was so prominent that somebody would be able to pick it out. And it was really the fact that the female officer was the bad cop. But by her crying, it threw Lee off even more, because She was blaming him for what he was doing. She was attacking him, saying he did it, he murdered her. Now, she almost seemed to be embodying the victim's mother and kind of bringing emotions to the forefront of this interrogation and seeing if, emotions and empathy and a conscience would break Lee. And of course, someone with little empathy, a psychopathic killer, this wouldn't work on because they don't have empathy and therefore their emotions would not be triggered in this case. And how she was showing this emotion. And the female's part was so important because the male officer was the good cop and he was saying, I really don't think that you were involved in this, but you kind of had a part in this case, so we just need to fit you in to see where you are and then we'll figure out the killer. And he was really siding with him. He was agreeing with everything and Lee's stories, and that was the thing. Lee could continue with his false stories and hold them together, hold himself together, because this officer was just egging him on like he was supposed to be doing. And he enjoyed what this male officer was doing for his ego and for his pride and for his lies. But when you throw in an officer who is not only telling you that you're a killer, but also pleading for you to say something different, if you have any sort of emotion, this could change the whole way you're thinking and get you sidetracked to make your story ultimately crack and crumble beneath you. Because, if you start to feel any sort of empathy, or even if you start to realize somebody's not listening to you or doesn't believe you, your story is going to veer in different ways and suddenly it's not going to be making any sense. Faced with an emotional response, I think that Lee started to exude one as well. And, this ultimately did get the confession out of him, or at least that's what I believe. And I even saw some people commenting saying that this officer was actually trying to portray the victim in her final moments, saying things like, "I'm begging you, Lee, I'm begging you, please," over and over again, is something that a victim would be saying when they're fighting for their lives. And so this is something that could have put him back in that scenario of when it was happening. And of course, when you're going through that in your mind while trying to tell a lie about you not doing something, something's going to slip out, hopefully. Now, the Jacksonville community had been out searching for Savannah, and investigators would then find knives, gas cans, bleach, and a fire pit at Lee's home. And he would tell them where her body was. 3 days after her disappearance, he would say that he had dumped it in a nearby lake, and it was found in a west side pond. She was wrapped in a plastic sheet as well as a blanket, and she had been burned to the point that it was 75% of her body. She was already decomposing, and she also had injuries to 75% of her body. Now, she was bound in duct tape, and when she was brought in for an autopsy, her cause of death could not be determined because that's how bad her injuries were, but it was ruled a violent homicide. Now, her family put a vigil together at one of her favorite parks in the area, and friends, as well as most of the community and family members, were all there to show their support. Even people who had met her one time while she was serving them at the Bonefish Grill. And there was actually a jar right by a whole bunch of pictures of her throughout the years of growing up that said, "Please take a sheet of paper and write a favorite memory of Savannah. Fold it up and put it in the jar for the Golds to read each year on Savannah's birthday." Now, Savannah's family did decide to have a private funeral after this, just because the media had made it such a big case and many people knew about it, and they just wanted that time to be able to grieve alone. Now, there was a GoFundMe set up by Savannah's aunt to help with the burial expenses, and this would actually raise $28,000, which was well over what they expected. And so after they paid off everything, they decided to put the rest of the money into organizations that would be near and dear to Savannah's heart. And I think this is so beautiful to know. They could have just kept that money and used it, for family things, and they decided to give back because Savannah had such a wonderful heart about her, and they decided that that would be best, that she would want that. They gave to organizations like the Hubbard House in Jacksonville, which helps domestic violence abuse survivors and their families, as well as the First Coast No More Homeless Pets, and the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and the La Villa School of Arts, where Savannah went to school. Lee was in jail at this point without bail and being charged with second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a body. And at the trial, he would actually plead not guilty after confessing in the interrogation room, and he would say it was actually all in self-defense. That Savannah had been hitting him over and over again, that he feared for his life, and so he was trying to get her off of him, and his hands were around her neck when he felt a pop. This was yet again another story that had holes in it and didn't quite make sense, but it was enough to delay the trial, because he could file a stand your ground claim, means that he was justified in standing his ground and meeting force with force. So he basically could not be charged with murder if that was the case, and this was a month before he was supposed to go to trial. So what did this mean for his case? Well, the stand your ground law is the right to defend oneself or others against a threat or a perceived threat, even if there is the ability to get away, or they could have gotten away. It's that, you can stand your ground, you can fight back, even if that becomes deadly and you're still innocent of murder. And this would ultimately require the prosecutors to prove that Lee didn't act in self-defense to be able to commit him of that murder, which would be harder to do than proving that he just did commit murder. Lee Rodarte's new claim would push this case back significantly. I mean, they would go from having it in February 2019 to August 2019, and nothing has happened since. We're now in February, or is it March 2020, and we have not seen or heard anything else happening in this case. And, this would make sense as to why we don't have all of the interrogation footage, including his confession, because, of course, it is still an ongoing investigation. But one thing that I found was that Savannah's body had been found to not have any spinal fractures, but she did not have any drugs in her system. And Lee was convinced that she had just done heroin right before she got in his car, but none were found. Was everything that Lee said a lie? How much of it was the truth? Was there anything that was the truth? Savannah's parents are concerned that this case still hasn't gone anywhere. I mean, they cannot move on until Lee is convicted, and they're quite honestly extremely tired. Savannah's mother, Sherry, who is still dealing with cancer and chemo treatment, say she has had to miss multiple treatments because she has wanted to go to these hearings, to these court dates, and it's been 3 years now of constantly not knowing what's going to happen and not knowing if she's going to be able to see justice being done for her daughter before she passes. Sherry often wonders if Savannah hadn't given up everything and had gone to college, if this still would have been her fate. And, she kind of blames herself in a way which is heartbreaking, and it's definitely not her fault, but they say that Lee extinguished a bright light in this world, and her parents have continued to ask people to make memorials for her and to share her story on social media to hopefully get this case moving. And that's exactly why I'm telling you this today, because it is more of a recent story than I like to do, but I think it's very important to get justice and to get a conviction. Now, many believe that Lee is actually a pathological liar, including Savannah's parents, who said there were multiple times they were supposed to meet Lee when him and Savannah were together, but he would always make up an excuse and never show up. And they said that everything that came out of that murderer's mouth is a lie, and that he had even walked right up to them when they were searching for Savannah and acted like he didn't know a thing, that he was concerned. Now, we would see that many times he changed his story to make it so that the answers he was being asked made sense, and even if it seemed strange, he could still make it seem like maybe that was a possibility, which is the sign of a good liar. because you're being manipulated. And his girlfriend Chelsea even said he was great at lying, and he got away with cheating on her for quite a long time. And I think one of the things that about pathological liars that can confuse people is that they don't necessarily lie because there's a reason. They can do it just because that's what they do. Sometimes it doesn't benefit pathological liars to be lying, and in fact it would be easier to tell the truth, and so you wonder why they wouldn't just tell the truth. But it's said to almost be a compulsive urge for pathological liars rather than them choosing to make that decision, which doesn't make it any better, of course. But it's not necessarily a conscious decision that they are making. Telling lies is just said to be more natural to them than telling what really happened. You know, like you and me would just tell the story as it was, but they would feel like fabricating it was their truth. Now, this can also be found in sociopaths, which can lie without remorse and often without reason as well. They create elaborate lies to kind of form their own reality, and they don't care if it hurts someone else's feelings because they don't see the wrong in the lie. To them, it's just the same as the truth, so they don't understand when somebody hears a lie and thinks that it is wrong. Sociopaths often have a very small amount of empathy, if anything, and they can only really show emotions that they have learned. They don't have that natural ability to feel the emotions or to express them. However, it can look like they have them because really good sociopaths can put on an act, can put on a mask that can fool the best actors. They can watch somebody else and how they react to a situation and automatically know what to do themselves to make them look normal. And, you know, if they were at a funeral, they wouldn't know to be crying and to be sad, even if it's someone they knew. But if they looked around and everyone else was crying, they would suddenly be crying as well, because that is what is expected of a human. And they don't want to look out of place. And the one thing that sociopaths hate more than anything is being called out for their lie and their actions that don't make sense, because it is like their mask is breaking. And it's something that really irritates them. Now, it is said to be because they do have a conscience, but it's just very weak. However, since they do have a little bit of one, they do want people to believe their lies and their elaborate stories. And if they're caught, that is when they usually make more lies and more stories to cover up the fact that they were lying in the other story. They make more, and it just becomes this huge thing. And if it all comes crashing down, that's when they can either run away from the situation and what is happening, or they can have a huge breakdown. This is when tears can flow, a meltdown can happen, even if the emotions are just for show or what they think other people would be doing in that scenario. However, this could have very well been what happened when the female officer was pressuring Lee, showing all these emotions to Lee, pleading for him to tell the truth, and Lee began to cry. To me, I'm not sure that Lee was crying because he was emotional. I think he was crying because he had been caught in his lies, and there was no coming back from that. It had spiraled out of control, and he no longer had that control. I mean, he had gone on and on about Savannah doing drugs, but not one other account I found said she did anything like that. And, you know, was this another lie of his to make her look bad, to make himself look better? Now, of course, not all people with antisocial personality disorder, which is being a sociopath, put on this mask to kill and to manipulate people and to do horrible things, you know, but some do. And do you think one of those is Lee? I mean, one of the biggest signs of being a sociopath is someone who believes that the world is a game and will manipulate different people to do different things or to see them in different ways so that they can get the most out of them. And we see this with how Lee kind of treated Savannah's parents and her co-workers when Savannah went missing. He was able to fool them into believing he was just a concerned manager and not her killer. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say for sure, but I have been around multiple people who are sociopaths, and I can say that Lee does show the signs of being one. But do you think that Lee did kill her in self-defense? Do you think there is any way that that really did occur? Also, do you think Chelsea, his girlfriend, had anything to do with it? He kind of said a lot about her and referred to her a lot as the reason that he had gone to see Savannah, and that they often got in fights over Savannah. I mean, did Chelsea tell him to kill her? Did she have nothing to do with it? Did she possibly help him? Or did he do it for her to get her off of his back, as far as thinking that Savannah and him were cheating again? Strangely enough, I found that Lee's sister, Amber Camarillo, was found guilty of murder a year prior to Savannah's murder in 2016 and was sentenced to 20 years. Amber had pulled out a gun at the Raquel Wallace Motel and shot a woman to death, and this was caught on surveillance footage as well. And Amber claimed that it was self-defense because she was in fear for her life, because Amber stole her car and demanded money for its return. I mean, how odd is it that these cases are so similar, of these siblings murdering a year apart, it being seen on surveillance footage, them both claiming self-defense? That's just crazy to me. So I thought I would throw that in here because, you know, it just makes you think once again, does it have something to do with DNA? And that's always the nature versus nurture debate. And, you know, I just think that that's one thing that we really should put more time into looking into, because I think it could change a lot if we knew that answer, or if we knew how to spot the killers and the signs that lead them to be one. But I really do hope that this helps to push this case forward. And if I find any more out about, you know, petitions to sign or whatever that could help push this case and have Lee actually go to trial, I will do so. I couldn't find any just yet, and it really just seems like this case is at a standstill, which is so heartbreaking because, like I said, her parents have been waiting for years for this just to be done, and it doesn't seem like anything is being done at this point. And Savannah deserves that more than anything. And I hate that her name was so tarnished by his interrogation footage, and I hope that you know by me telling you everything Lee said about her like that, it wasn't to make her look bad in any way. In fact, I don't even think that most of it was the truth. I wanted to show you how someone who is possibly a sociopath, possibly a pathological liar, can manipulate the situation and have you believing that a victim is the person who is in the wrong, and have you believing that they are the innocent one, they are the victim. And I hope you know that that can happen so often, and that's why you have to be really careful with what you're believing that people say, because a lot of the times these monsters can make somebody who they did something horrible to seem like the monster. And they can do it to the point where you have no idea that you have just been bamboozled until it's too late. And maybe it occurs again. You know, thankfully I do think that Lee is still behind bars and can't hurt anybody, but so many people get released because everybody believes their lies. So I hope it just makes you more aware, and that these videos make it known to you how easy it is to be manipulated, because, you know, listening to the surveillance footage, I truly did believe, I was like, well, maybe Savannah, you know, was into these horrible things. And I can't confirm that she wasn't, but I can almost guarantee that it wasn't as bad as Lee said. And the fact that no drugs were found in her system is quite telling to me. So, yeah. I don't know, I always hope that these videos are educational to you guys and make you think, and hope you know that I'm not perfect in my research, I'm not perfect in what I know about all of these different, you know, mental illnesses and psychology, but I do try my best, and I hope that it is bringing awareness to it. So, yeah. Don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay. Bye.